The first thing I noticed wasn't the light. It was the color. My front porch had always glowed with this soft amber warmth every evening, the kind of light that made an old cedar cabin feel like home. But that Tuesday night it hit me in the face like a police spotlight. Then I saw the note taped to my front door. $200. HOA violation. 10 days to pay. That's when I realized someone had walked onto my property while I was gone, removed something that had belonged to my family for over 50 years, and somehow thought they had every right to do it. My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 36 years old, and I work as a licensed plumbing contractor just outside Prescott, Arizona. My life isn't glamorous. Most mornings start before sunrise with a thermos of coffee that gets cold before noon, a truck full of copper fittings, and another customer whose pipes decided to burst at the worst possible moment. I don't live behind security gates or decorative fountains. My place is the oldest home left on that stretch of road, a weathered cabin my grandfather built with his own hands back in 1964 when there wasn't another house for miles. Back then, the desert smelled like sage after a summer rain, and the only sounds at night were coyotes and crickets. Things changed. Developers arrived. Then came luxury homes with oversized garages, imported palm trees that had no business growing in Arizona, perfectly trimmed lawns that drank more water than a small farm, and eventually a homeowners association that believed matching mailboxes were somehow more important than respecting history. The funny part was, they never actually had authority over my property. My family's deed had been recorded decades before anyone even dreamed up the neighborhood. Every lawyer who ever looked at it said the same thing. I wasn't part of their HOA. Never had been. Never would be. That fact bothered some people more than it probably should have. Especially the HOA president, Denise Holloway. Denise loved rules the way some people love grandchildren. Every month there was another newsletter reminding residents what color flowers they could plant, how long garage doors could stay open, or what shade of beige was acceptable for front doors. She couldn't control me, and I think that ate at her a little more every year. We crossed paths before. She once complained that my work truck looked too commercial parked in my own driveway. Another time she asked if I'd consider replacing my old split-rail fence because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I smiled both times and reminded her that aesthetics don't override property law. She never smiled back. So when I walked onto my porch that evening and saw that cold white LED floodlight bolted above my front door, I knew immediately this wasn't some maintenance mistake. Someone had planned it. They'd even removed my grandfather's old Edison bulb, the same 40-watt bulb fixture he proudly installed after wiring the cabin himself. Sure, the bulb itself had been replaced many times over the decades, but the fixture was original. Every Thanksgiving, my grandfather would joke that if that porch light ever disappeared, he'd come back just to haunt whoever took it. Standing there, holding that violation notice, I actually laughed for about 3 seconds, not because it was funny, but because the arrogance of it felt almost unbelievable. They trespassed onto private property, removed family property, installed their own equipment, then fined me for not asking permission. That's confidence on a level you almost have to admire. Almost. My neighbor Walt happened to be walking his dog across the road when he saw me staring at the porch. He slowed down, looked at the new lights, then looked at the paper in my hand and quietly said, "She finally did it." Huh? I asked what he meant. Walt sighed and admitted he'd overheard Denise talking during the previous board meeting. She'd apparently told several homeowners that my cabin was lowering neighborhood values and that eventually I'd have to cooperate one way or another. Walt wasn't trying to stir up trouble. He'd lived there long enough to know when to keep his head down. Before leaving, he just looked back at the porch and muttered, "Some people mistake patience for weakness." That sentence stayed with me all night. I didn't call Denise. I didn't remove the new light. I didn't even touch the citation. Instead, I walked into my garage and opened an old steel filing cabinet my father had left behind. Inside were faded survey maps, yellowed title records, utility drawings, handwritten notes from my grandfather, and decades of paperwork most people would have thrown away long ago. I spread everything across my workbench, and somewhere around midnight I found myself staring at an original boundary survey completed in 1986. That's when one strange thought crossed my mind. If they were bold enough to replace something on my porch without asking, what else had they quietly decided belonged to them? The next morning I called in a favor from an old friend named Trevor Mills, a licensed land surveyor I'd known since high school. Trevor was the kind of guy who got excited about boundary markers the way other people got excited about football. When I asked if he could spend a day helping me verify a property line, he laughed and said, You don't sound angry. You sound curious. That's usually more dangerous. He wasn't wrong. We spent nearly 8 hours walking every inch of my property. He carried a GPS survey unit while I carried the old plats and a notebook. At first, everything looked normal. Then Trevor stopped near the edge of my driveway, crouched down, brushed away a layer of decorative gravel, and looked back at me with raised eyebrows. Well, that's interesting. The decorative rock border separating my property from the HOA entrance landscaping wasn't actually on their side. It crossed nearly 18 inches onto my land and continued for almost 70 feet. I asked if he was sure. He checked again. Same answer. We kept walking. About 20 yards farther, he pointed at a row of irrigation heads tucked between desert shrubs. 12 sprinkler heads. Every single one installed inside my legal boundary. None of them watered my property. Every one of them fed the HOA entrance landscaping. Trevor looked at me and quietly said, "Someone didn't just make a mistake here. Somebody built an entire irrigation system assuming you'd never notice." That sentence hit differently. Suddenly, the porch light didn't feel like the real problem anymore. It was just the newest addition to a much older pattern. By lunchtime, we'd found 4 fence posts anchored in concrete nearly 2 feet inside my property. Near the northwest corner sat a security camera mounted on a steel pole overlooking the neighborhood entrance. It wasn't watching my cabin. It was protecting HOA property while standing on my land. Then came the surprise neither of us expected. Trevor's equipment picked up an underground drainage easement that existed on county maps but had never been legally granted. We traced the line and discovered stormwater pipes running beneath one corner of my lot, carrying runoff away from 12 luxury homes every time heavy rain hit. No easement agreement, no recorded permission, no compensation, nothing. Trevor removed his hat, scratched his head, and said, "Ethan, if everything we're seeing checks out with county records, this isn't one violation. This is years of unauthorized use." That night, I barely slept, not because I was angry anymore, but because my mind kept replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Denise, every little comment about my property, every complaint about appearances, every suggestion that I'd eventually need to cooperate with the neighborhood. Looking back, it almost felt like she'd convinced herself my land was already theirs. The following morning, I met with a property attorney named Claire Benson. She spent nearly 2 hours reviewing surveys, photographs, title records, tax documents, and county filings without interrupting. Finally, she leaned back, folded her hands, and asked one simple question. "Do you want revenge, or do you want resolution?" I thought about it for a second before answering honestly. "I want people to stop acting like ownership only matters when it's convenient." She smiled. "Good answer." Claire explained something that surprised me. Property law isn't emotional. Courts don't care who has nicer landscaping or prettier houses. They care about permission. If someone occupies private property without legal authority, especially over multiple years, damages can accumulate quickly depending on state law and documented losses. She wasn't promising hundreds of thousands of dollars. Good attorneys never make promises. But she did say something else. "Your strongest case isn't the porch light. It's everything they assumed you'd never measure." That became our strategy. Over the next 2 weeks, my life turned into paperwork. We photographed every sprinkler head from multiple angles. Drone footage documented the fence line. Utility records confirmed installation dates. County permit offices searched their archives. Nothing. No approvals. No signed easements. No agreements with my family. Claire even hired an engineering consultant who estimated the removal costs if every unauthorized structure had to come off my land immediately. The estimate landed just under $30,000. Meanwhile, I kept going to work like nothing had changed. I fixed leaking water heaters, unclogged kitchen drains, replaced broken pressure regulators. My customers had no idea that every evening I was building what looked more like a courtroom exhibit than a plumbing schedule. One Friday afternoon, Walt wandered over carrying 2 iced teas. We sat on my porch beneath that ugly LED light neither of us wanted to touch. After a few minutes, he asked, "You ever think about just selling?" I looked across the road at rows of identical houses with identical driveways and identical mailboxes. "My grandfather planted that mesquite tree with my dad when he was 6 years old," I said, pointing toward the front yard. "My mom taught me to ride a bike right there. Every holiday we cooked outside under that porch light. If I sell because somebody makes life uncomfortable, then they weren't buying land. They were buying permission to bully." Walt nodded without saying another word. 3 days later, Claire mailed a certified demand package addressed to Denise Holloway and every member of the HOA board. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't threatening. It simply listed every documented encroachment with photographs, measurements, installation timelines, engineering reports, legal references, and a 30-day deadline to remove unauthorized improvements or begin settlement discussions. Attached was a detailed calculation estimating potential damages if litigation became necessary. When Denise received it, she called before lunchtime. I recognized her number and let her ring twice before answering. "You've lost your mind," she said without saying hello. "Those improvements benefit the entire neighborhood." I leaned back in my chair. "That's probably true." There was a pause. She seemed surprised I agreed. "Then why are you making this into such a big deal?" she asked. "Because benefiting other people isn't the same thing as getting permission." Her voice hardened. "You're really going to sue over some sprinklers?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm considering legal action over years of unauthorized occupation of private property. The sprinklers are just evidence." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You'll never get a judge to care about 18 inches of dirt." "Maybe not," I said. "But judges tend to care about property rights." I wished her a pleasant afternoon and ended the call before she could answer. 4 days passed without another word. Then Trevor called me while I was replacing a water heater downtown. "You should probably head home after work," he said. "Something's happening." When I pulled onto my road that evening, 2 expensive SUVs were parked outside my cabin. Denise stood beside them wearing sunglasses even though the sun was nearly down. Next to her was the HOA vice president, Mark Ellison, and another man carrying a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Their confidence from the phone call had disappeared. Denise forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'd like to have a conversation," she said. I invited them onto the porch. None of them sat down. Trevor's survey maps covered a folding table, every encroachment highlighted in bright red. Claire had arranged the documents in chronological order so the story practically told itself. Mark flipped through the pages silently while Denise kept insisting these were community improvements that had existed for years. Finally, the man with the folder introduced himself as the HOA's attorney. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Mr. Mercer, is it your position that you never granted permission for any of these installations?" I looked directly at him. "It's not my position. It's the county record." Nobody said anything for several seconds. Then Mark quietly admitted the irrigation system supplied water to 8 homes during drought restrictions. Denise immediately shot him an angry look, but the damage was done. A few moments later, the attorney asked another question. "And the drainage pipes?" I answered honestly. "They protect at least a dozen backyards from flooding." He nodded slowly, closed his folder, and stared at the survey map for a long time. The entire conversation shifted in that instant. They had arrived expecting an argument. Instead, they found evidence. Denise finally broke the silence, crossed her arms, and muttered, "So what exactly do you want?" I looked around the porch, glanced up at the cold white LED light still hanging where my grandfather's fixture used to be, then back at every face standing in front of me. For the first time since this started, I knew the leverage had completely changed, and I already knew exactly what my answer was. I didn't answer Denise right away. I walked past them, reached up, unscrewed the bright white LED floodlight they had installed without my permission, and carefully set it on the porch floor. Then I opened a small cardboard box I'd kept in my garage ever since the day I found my grandfather's original fixture tossed into a storage bin behind the cabin. I had cleaned it, polished the brass, and wired it back together myself. Holding it in my hands, I looked at Denise and said, "You know, this whole thing was never about a porch light." She didn't respond. Neither did anyone else. They were finally listening. This is about a group of people convincing themselves that if they ignored someone else's rights long enough, those rights would eventually disappear. The HOA attorney slowly nodded. Almost reluctantly, Claire slid a folder across the table containing our proposed settlement. It wasn't outrageous. It wasn't emotional. It simply reflected reality. First, reimbursement for the unauthorized use of my land over the previous several years. Second, a paid access agreement allowing the irrigation and drainage systems to remain temporarily because removing everything immediately would disrupt homeowners who had done nothing wrong. Third, removal of the security camera and fence posts that served no essential purpose. Fourth, reimbursement of the ridiculous $200 citation they'd issued me. Fifth, written confirmation that my property would remain permanently outside HOA authority with no future attempts to regulate improvements on my land. Finally, A public apology published in 2 consecutive neighborhood newsletters acknowledging that unauthorized work had been performed without the owner's consent. Denise barely made it halfway through before dropping the papers onto the table. "This is unbelievable," she snapped. "You're trying to profit from a misunderstanding," Claire answered before I could. "No. He's asking to resolve documented legal exposure. If this proceeds to litigation, my client will also seek removal costs, additional damages where applicable, attorney fees if awarded, and any other remedies the court considers appropriate." Denise looked toward her attorney, clearly expecting him to argue. Instead, he quietly asked if they could have a few minutes alone. The board members walked to the edge of my driveway. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the conversation wasn't going well. Denise waved her arms dramatically. Mark kept pointing back toward Trevor's survey maps. The attorney spoke very little, but every time he did, everyone else stopped talking. About 20 minutes later, they returned. Denise looked exhausted, like someone who had spent years believing she was the smartest person in every room and had suddenly discovered otherwise. "We'll need some revisions," the attorney said calmly, "but I believe we can reach an agreement." We spent the next several hours negotiating details instead of principles because the principles were no longer in dispute. The reimbursement amount was adjusted to reflect documented costs and historical use. The access agreement became a 15-year paid easement with annual payments made in advance. The camera would be removed within 10 days. The fence posts would be relocated entirely onto HOA property. The violation notice would be withdrawn and refunded. My exemption from HOA authority would be formally recorded alongside the property records to prevent future boards from trying the same stunt again. When the final documents were signed a week later, I didn't feel victorious the way people imagine after winning a legal dispute. Mostly, I felt relieved. Relief is quieter than revenge. It doesn't come with dramatic speeches or triumphant music. It feels like finally setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. About 6 weeks after everything ended, I walked outside one evening with a cup of coffee, just as the sun slipped behind the mountains. I reached up and switched on my grandfather's porch light. That familiar warm amber glow spread across the old wooden steps exactly the way I remembered as a kid sitting beside him, listening to stories about building the cabin from almost nothing. Across the road, the neighborhood entrance still looked immaculate. The sprinklers still watered the landscaping. The drainage system still protected homes during monsoon season. Life went on almost exactly as before, except now it went on legally. Every year, the HOA mailed the required easement payment without reminders, arguments, or surprise inspections. Denise finished her term as president not long afterward. I heard she moved to another community across town, one with stricter architectural guidelines. Somehow that seemed fitting. As for me, I still live in the same cabin. The driveway is still cracked. The siding still needs another coat of stain. My work truck is usually dusty by Friday afternoon, and the porch still glows with that soft amber light every evening. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it all again knowing how stressful it became. My answer is always the same. I never fought over a light fixture. I fought because ownership means something. Boundaries matter. Permission matters. If we start pretending those things only apply when they're convenient, then sooner or later, none of us really owns anything at all. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had been in my position, would you have accepted the settlement and moved on? Or would you have taken a case all the way to court to pursue every dollar available? And if you were one of the homeowners benefiting from improvements you never knew were built on someone else's land, who do you think should have been responsible? Let me know in the comments because stories like this rarely have simple answers. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's ever dealt with an HOA that forgot where its authority ended and someone else's property rights began. Until next time, thanks for listening.